Chapter 1, The Case and the Creed. Terry Creed didn't believe in luck. Luck was for gamblers and dreamers, and she was neither. She believed in evidence, cold, hard, undeniable proof. That was why, at 35, she was sitting in her office with a laptop open, 3 coffee cups scattered across the desk, and a pair of noise-canceling headphones dangling around her neck like a stethoscope. The hum of the city outside barely registered. Her world was a grid of facts, timestamps, and digital breadcrumbs. The office wasn't glamorous. It was functional. 2 desks, a wall of filing cabinets, and a corkboard cluttered with photos, printouts, and sticky notes in colors that had long lost their meaning. A faint smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air, courtesy of the ancient machine in the corner that Dean swore he'd replace soon. Terry didn't hold her breath. She leaned back in her chair, scrolling through a feed of tagged photos. Her latest client suspected her fiancé of extracurricular activities, and Terry was halfway through proving it. The man's Instagram was a goldmine of vanity shots and gym selfies, but the real gems were in the background, reflections and mirrors, shadows and corners, and the occasional manicured hand that wasn't his. Got him, she muttered, zooming in on a photo of the fiancé flexing in a hotel bathroom. The reflection in the shower door showed a woman's silhouette, unmistakable even in the blur. Terry saved the image to her evidence folder, labeling it with the precision of a surgeon. The door opened behind her, and Dean Howe strolled in like he owned the place, which, in a way, he did. He was the reason Terry's tech setup didn't look like something from a 1998 crime drama. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a wardrobe that screamed, comfortable but expensive. Dean was the kind of man people noticed. Terry had noticed too, once, but she filed that thought away years ago under not relevant to the case. "Morning, boss," Dean said, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a bag that smelled suspiciously like fresh pastries. "You look like someone who's been staring at pixels for 3 hours straight." 2.5, Terry corrected without looking up. "And I've got him. Hotel bathroom selfie. Reflection shows company." Dean set the coffee on her desk and leaned over her shoulder, close enough that Terry caught the scent of his cologne. Clean, understated, annoyingly pleasant. "Nice catch," he said, his voice low and warm. "You're like the Sherlock Holmes of Instagram." "Holmes didn't have to deal with filters and hashtags," Terry replied, clicking through to cross-reference the timestamp. "This guy tagged the hotel. Rookie mistake." Dean grinned. "People lie, but metadata doesn't." Terry shot him a look. "Don't steal my lines." "Wouldn't dream of it." He slid the pastry bag toward her. "Almond croissant. Because I care about your blood sugar, even if you don't." She hesitated, then took it. "You're spoiling me." "Someone has to," Dean said lightly, but his eyes lingered on her for a beat too long before he turned to his own desk. Terry ignored the flutter in her chest. She was good at ignoring things. Feelings, memories, the fact that her ex-husband had spent 2 years auditioning replacements while married to her. 6 years later, the sting had dulled, but the scar remained. Love was a con, and she'd seen enough cons to know the odds. She bit into the croissant, savoring the buttery layers despite herself. "What's on the schedule?" Dean tapped his tablet. 2 background checks, 1 missing cat, don't ask, and a new client inquiry. "Wants to meet in person." "Name?" "Lila Hart. Says it's urgent." Terry raised an eyebrow. "They always say that." Dean shrugged. "She sounded dramatic." "Great," Terry said dryly. "I love drama before lunch." Dean chuckled, and for a moment, the office felt lighter. Terry pushed the thought away and focused on the case file. Evidence first. Always evidence. Chapter 2, Dean's quiet confession. Dean Howe had a rule. Never let Terry Creed see him sweat. It wasn't easy, considering she had a knack for reading people like open books. But Dean had spent years perfecting the art of being unreadable, at least when it came to the one thing that mattered most, his feelings for her. He sat at his desk, pretending to scroll through code on his tablet, while Terry finished her croissant and typed furiously on her laptop. The rhythmic clack of her keys was oddly soothing, like rain against a window. Dean stole a glance at her, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, sharp eyes scanning the screen, lips pursed in concentration. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or designer clothes. Terry Creed was substance over style, and that was exactly what made her dangerous to his heart. 6 years he'd known her. 6 years of being the guy in the passenger seat, the tech whisperer, the one who made sure her car didn't break down in the middle of a stakeout. He'd watched her rebuild her life after the divorce, brick by brick, case by case. And he'd kept his feelings locked away, because Terry didn't do romance. She did evidence, proof, certainty. Love was messy, unpredictable, everything she hated. Dean sighed quietly and opened his calendar. Lila Hart's meeting was in an hour. He'd already run a quick background check, social media influencer, 32, engaged to a venture capitalist with a jawline that could cut glass. Her feed was a curated dream of sunsets, designer handbags, and motivational quotes about living your truth. Dean had a feeling her truth was about to implode. "Dean," Terry said suddenly, snapping him out of his thoughts. "You ever notice how people post their lives online like it's a highlight reel?" He smirked. "You mean like Lila Hart?" Yeah, her Instagram looks like a perfume ad. Terry leaned back, stretching her arms. Makes my job easier. People lie, but their selfies don't. Dean chuckled. You should put that on a business card. She shot him a look, amused. You volunteering to design it? Always, he said too quickly. He covered with a grin, but his chest tightened. If only she knew how much he meant that, always. The office phone rang, slicing through the moment. Terry answered, her tone brisk, professional. Dean listened to her side of the conversation, noting the shift in her voice when she said, we'll take care of it. That was Terry. Unflappable, confident, the kind of woman who made promises and kept them. When she hung up, Dean asked, client. Lila, Terry said, grabbing her jacket. She's panicking. Wants to meet at the Glasshouse Cafe. Dean stood, snagging the car keys. I'll drive. You always do, Terry said with a faint smile. And for a second, Dean let himself imagine what it would be like if that smile meant more. The Glasshouse Cafe was all chrome and sunlight, the kind of place where influencers posed with lattes like they were rare artifacts. Terry walked in like she owned the joint, jeans, leather jacket, zero pretense. Dean followed, scanning the room until he spotted Lila Hart at a corner table, oversized sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Ms. Creed. Lila stood, all nerves and gloss. Thank you for coming. Call me Terry, she said, sliding into the seat opposite. Dean took the chair beside her, pulling out his tablet. Lila launched into her story, fiancé acting distant, late-night texts, a gut feeling something was wrong. Terry listened, calm and methodical, while Dean typed notes. He'd heard this song before. Love gone sour, trust eroding like sand under waves. Terry's expression didn't change, but Dean knew what she was thinking. People lie. Evidence doesn't. When Lila finally paused for breath, Terry said, we'll look into it, discreetly. Lila nodded, relief flooding her face. Thank you. I need to know. Dean watched Terry slide the client's retainer into her bag, her movements precise, controlled. She was a fortress, and he was the guy standing outside the gates, hoping for a crack in the wall. As they left the cafe, Terry said, she's hiding something. Dean raised an eyebrow. You think? I know, Terry said, her voice cool as steel. People don't hire me because they trust their instincts. They hire me because they don't. Dean smiled faintly. And you never get it wrong. Not when I have evidence, she said, unlocking the car. Dean hesitated, then asked, what about when you don't? Terry glanced at him, puzzled. Then I wait until I do. Dean nodded, masking the ache in his chest. He'd been waiting for 6 years. And he'd keep waiting because Terry Creed didn't believe in luck. But maybe, just maybe, she believed in loyalty. Chapter 3, the setup. The morning after the Glasshouse Cafe meeting, Terry Creed was already knee-deep in digital footprints. Her office smelled faintly of coffee and determination. On her screen, Lila Hart's fiancé, Ethan Vale, smiled from a dozen curated photos, all sharp suits and champagne flutes. Perfect teeth, perfect life. Terry didn't buy it for a second. Dean sat across from her, laptop open, fingers flying over the keys. He was running a deep scrape of Ethan's social media, cross-referencing geotags with credit card transactions. Terry had taught him the basics years ago, but Dean had turned into a full-blown wizard. If there was a digital skeleton in Ethan's closet, Dean would find it. Got something? Dean said, swiveling his screen toward her. Ethan checked into a hotel in Midtown last Thursday. No mention on his socials, but his Amex statement confirms it. Terry leaned in, scanning the data. Midtown? That's not his usual pattern. Dean smirked. Unless his usual pattern involves secret hotel stays. Could be business, Terry said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. Cross-check with his calendar. Dean tapped a few keys. Blocked out as client dinner. Terry snorted. Classic. Dean grinned. You love when they make it easy. I love when they're predictable, Terry corrected, pulling up a map. Hotel's 2 blocks from a bridal boutique. Interesting. Dean raised an eyebrow. You think he's shopping for wedding stuff? Or something else entirely, Terry said, grabbing her jacket. We're going to Midtown. Dean stood, snagging the keys. Stakeout. Surveillance, Terry said. Deadpan. Stakeout sounds like we're in a bad cop show. Dean chuckled. Fine. Surveillance. Should I pack snacks? Always, Terry said. And for a moment, her lips curved into a smile that made Dean's chest tighten. The drive to Midtown was a symphony of honking horns and Terry's playlist, a mix of classic rock and moody blues. Dean drove with easy confidence, one hand on the wheel, the other drumming to the beat. Terry stared out the window, her mind ticking through possibilities like a metronome. You ever wonder why people cheat? She asked suddenly. Dean glanced at her. All the time. And, he shrugged. Because they can. Because they're bored. Because they're stupid. Terry smirked. You sound cynical. Comes with the job, Dean said lightly, though his eyes softened. But not everyone's like that. Terry didn't answer. She was thinking about her ex, about the additions, the lies, the way he'd smiled while breaking vows. Evidence had saved her then, and it had hardened her ever since. Dean wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that loyalty wasn't extinct, that some people stayed even when it hurt. But he kept his mouth shut. Timing was everything, and this wasn't it. The hotel was sleek and anonymous, the kind of place where secrets checked in and never left. Terry parked across the street, camera ready. Dean set up the tech, long-range mic, encrypted feed, the works. They settled in, two professionals doing what they did best. Hours passed. They watched Ethan arrive, all charm and tailored confidence. He wasn't alone. A woman joined him, tall, brunette. Definitely not Lila Hart. Terry snapped photos, her movements precise, detached. Evidence. Always evidence. Dean watched her work, admiring the focus, the way she compartmentalized everything. He wondered if she ever let herself feel, really feel, anything beyond the case. He wondered if she'd ever look at him the way she looked at the truth. Got him, Terry said, lowering the camera. Dinner reservation for 2. Same boutique tomorrow. Dean whistled softly. That's not wedding prep. No, Terry said, her voice cool as ice. That's motive. Dean packed up the gear, his mind buzzing with questions he'd never ask. Terry Creed was a fortress and he was still outside the gates. But for now, he'd settle for being her shield. Chapter 4: Old Wounds. The boutique smelled like roses and ambition. Terry Creed hated both. She stood near a rack of ivory gowns, pretending to admire the beadwork while her camera lens peeked through the folds of chiffon. Across the room, Ethan Vale laughed with the brunette, his hand resting on her waist like it belonged there. Terry snapped the shot, her expression unreadable. Got him, she murmured, lowering the camera. Dean, lounging by the door in a tailored blazer that made him look like he belonged in a magazine spread, grinned. You're ruthless. Efficient, Terry corrected, slipping the camera into her bag. Let's go before someone notices. They stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the city buzzing around them. Terry felt the familiar rush of satisfaction. Another lie exposed, another truth nailed down. But before she could savor it, fate decided to play dirty. Creed. The voice was smooth, smug, and painfully familiar. Terry froze. Slowly, she turned. And there he was, Marcus Creed, her ex-husband, looking like a walking advertisement for bad decisions. Perfect suit, perfect smile, and the same infuriating confidence that had once charmed her and then gutted her. Terry, Marcus said, his grin widening. Wow, it's been, what, 6 years? Not long enough, Terry said coolly, adjusting her bag like it was a shield. Dean stepped closer, his presence solid and grounding. Friend of yours? He asked, voice casual but eyes sharp. Marcus's gaze flicked to Dean, assessing. Ex-husband, Terry said flatly. Marcus, this is Dean. Dean extended a hand, his smile polite but firm. Nice to meet you. Marcus shook it, his grip a shade too strong. So, you two are? Yes, Terry said before Dean could answer. Her tone was smooth, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it in her head 1,000 times. We're together. Dean blinked, then recovered instantly. Absolutely, he said, sliding an arm around her waist with the ease of a man who'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. 6 years is a long time. But hey, some things are worth waiting for. Marcus's smile faltered, just a fraction. Terry felt a surge of satisfaction she hadn't expected. Well, Marcus said, clearing his throat. Good for you. Good for me, Terry echoed, her voice like glass. Take care, Marcus. They walked away, Dean's arm still around her. Terry didn't shrug it off. Not yet. Not until they turned the corner and the boutique disappeared behind them. Thanks, she said quietly. Dean glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Anytime. Terry stopped, looking up at him. You didn't have to play along. Dean's smile was soft, almost wistful. You think I minded? Terry opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in years, she felt unsettled. Not by Marcus, but by the warmth in Dean's eyes, the way his arm had felt like it belonged there. She shook it off, forcing her voice back to neutral. Let's get back to the office. We've got a client to update. Dean nodded, but as he unlocked the car, he thought about the way Terry had said we're together. He knew it was a lie, but for one fleeting moment, it had felt like the truth. Chapter 5: Evidence of Attraction. The stakeout was supposed to be boring. That was the point. Hours of waiting, watching, and documenting without drawing attention. Terry Creed had done hundreds of them, and they all blurred together into a haze of lukewarm coffee and cramped car seats. But this one felt different. She sat in the passenger seat of her black SUV, camera balanced on her knee, eyes trained on the glowing windows of Ethan Vale's apartment. The city hummed around them. Horns, laughter, the distant wail of a siren. But inside the car, it was quiet, comfortable, almost too comfortable. Dean was behind the wheel, one arm draped casually over the steering column, the other holding a bag of snacks like a peace offering. Pretzels or gummy bears? He asked, his tone light, teasing. Terry smirked. Gummy bears. Pretzels are for people who hate joy. Dean chuckled, handing her the bag. Noted. You're a sugar person. I'm a caffeine person, Terry corrected, popping a red gummy into her mouth. Sugar's just a bonus. Dean grinned, his eyes flicking to her before returning to the street. You know, most people would call this a terrible Friday night. Most people don't get paid to spy on liars, Terry said, adjusting the camera lens. Besides, I've had worse. Dean raised an eyebrow. Define worse. Dinner with Marcus's parents, Terry said without missing a beat. Dean laughed, the sound warm and easy. Okay, fair. That's worse. Terry smiled despite herself. It wasn't the first time Dean had made her laugh, but tonight it felt different. Maybe it was the way his voice softened when he said her name earlier, or the way his hand brushed hers when he passed the snacks. She told herself it was nothing, just proximity, just routine. But when she glanced at him, really glanced, she noticed things she hadn't before. The way his jaw tightened when he focused. The faint scar near his temple she'd never asked about. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, like he meant it. She looked away quickly, annoyed at herself. Attraction was a distraction, and distractions got people hurt. She knew that better than anyone. Hours crawled by. Ethan didn't show. Terry shifted in her seat, stretching her legs. He's late. Dean shrugged. Or he's smart. Smart people don't cheat, Terry said, her tone sharper than intended. Dean glanced at her, his expression unreadable. You really believe that? I believe people do what benefits them, Terry said, adjusting the focus on her camera. Love doesn't change that. Dean was quiet for a moment, then said softly, maybe not everyone. Terry froze, the words hanging between them like smoke. She wanted to ask what he meant, but before she could, headlights swept across the street. Ethan's car pulled up, and the brunette stepped out, laughing as he opened the door for her. Showtime, Terry said, snapping photos, her voice steady even as her pulse wasn't. Dean leaned forward, watching her work. He admired her precision, her control, the way she turned chaos into clarity. But he also saw the flicker in her eyes, the one that said she wasn't as untouchable as she wanted the world to believe. When the couple disappeared inside, Terry lowered the camera. Got him. Dean nodded, starting the engine. Back to the office? Yeah, Terry said, but her voice was softer now, almost distracted. She stared out the window as the city lights blurred past, wondering why Dean's words lingered like evidence she couldn't ignore. Chapter 6, The Complication. By Monday morning, Terry Creed had enough evidence to sink Ethan Vale's engagement like a stone. Photos, timestamps, receipts, her holy trinity of truth. She laid them out on her desk in neat digital folders, each labeled with surgical precision. Case closed, or so she thought. Dean walked in carrying 2 coffees and a look that said he had news. Morning, boss, he said, setting the cup beside her. You're going to want to sit down for this. Terry arched an eyebrow. I'm already sitting. Dean slid his tablet across the desk. Our brunette mystery woman? Not a mistress. Terry frowned, scanning the screen. What do you mean? She's a wedding planner, Dean said, tapping the photo. Name's Harper Lane. Runs a boutique service for high-profile clients. Ethan booked her 3 weeks ago. Terry blinked. So, the hotel? Planning session, Dean said. And the boutique? Dress fittings for Lila. Terry leaned back, her mind recalibrating. So he's not cheating. Dean shook his head. Not with Harper, anyway. Terry stared at the evidence, the photos that had felt so damning an hour ago. She hated being wrong. It wasn't just professional pride. It was personal. Wrong meant assumptions, and assumptions were for people who trusted feelings over facts. Okay, she said finally, her voice steady. So why hire me? Dean hesitated. Maybe Lila's gut was right about something else. Terry sighed, rubbing her temples. Or maybe she's just paranoid. Dean studied her for a moment. You ever think paranoia's just fear with better PR? Terry shot him a look. You've been reading too many philosophy blogs. Dean grinned, but his eyes were serious. I'm just saying, sometimes people aren't lying. Sometimes they're scared. Terry didn't answer. She was thinking about Marcus, about the way she'd ignored her own instincts until the evidence slapped her in the face. Fear had been there all along, whispering truths she didn't want to hear. They drove to Lila's apartment that afternoon, the city glittering under a pale winter sun. Terry sat in silence, her thoughts a tangle of contradictions. She hated uncertainty, but this case was full of it. And then there was Dean, steady, patient Dean, whose words lingered like fingerprints on glass. When Lila opened the door, she looked like a woman unraveling. Mascara smudged, hair in a messy bun, designer sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder. Did you find anything? She asked, voice trembling. Terry exchanged a glance with Dean before stepping inside. We found something, she said carefully, but it's not what you think. Lila sank onto the couch, clutching a throw pillow like a lifeline. He's hiding something. I know he is. Terry sat opposite her, calm and measured. He's planning your wedding. Lila blinked, confusion flickering across her face. What? Harper Lane, Terry said. Wedding planner. The hotel meetings, the boutique. There for you. For a moment, relief washed over Lila like sunlight. Then her expression darkened. Then why is he so distant? Why does he keep his phone locked? Why does he... Her voice cracked. Why does he feel like a stranger? Terry hesitated, the question hitting harder than she expected. She glanced at Dean, who gave her a look that said be honest. Terry wasn't used to honesty without evidence, but something in Lila's eyes, raw, desperate, made her soften. Sometimes, Terry said quietly, people pull away when they're scared. Doesn't mean they're lying. Lila stared at her, tears brimming. So what do I do? Terry opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't have an answer. Not for Lila. Not for herself. Back in the car, Dean drove in silence for a while before saying, "You were good with her." Terry snorted. "I told her nothing." "You told her the truth," Dean said, "even if it wasn't evidence." Terry stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold. Truth without evidence is just hope. Dean glanced at her, his voice low. "Maybe hope's not the enemy." Terry didn't reply. She couldn't, because for the first time in years, she wondered if hope was something she wanted back. Chapter 7, The Rival. Terry Creed hated networking events almost as much as she hated liars. But Lila Hart insisted on meeting at a charity gala. "Ethan will be there and I need you to observe," she'd said, her voice trembling like a violin string. So here Terry was, standing in a ballroom that smelled of champagne and ambition, wearing a black dress that felt like armor. Dean hovered at her side, looking annoyingly good in a charcoal suit. He carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who belonged anywhere, even among the city's elite. Terry told herself that noticing was irrelevant. Evidence, not aesthetics. "Remind me why we're here?" Dean murmured, scanning the crowd. "Because our client thinks her fiancé is hiding something," Terry said, sipping her drink. "And because people get sloppy when they think they're safe." Dean smirked. "You mean drunk." "Same difference," Terry said, her eyes sweeping the room. That's when she saw him, Julian Cross. Tall, lean, with a smile that could melt steel and a reputation that preceded him. Private investigator, rival, an occasional thorn in Terry's side. He was leaning against the bar like he owned it, chatting up a woman in a sequined gown. When his gaze landed on Terry, his grin widened. Well, Julian said, strolling over like a man who'd never been told no. "If it isn't Terry Creed," looking lethal as ever. Terry's jaw tightened. "Julian." Dean's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders squaring, jaw setting. Terry noticed. She always noticed. Julian's eyes flicked to Dean, assessing. "And who's this new partner?" "Dean Howe," Dean said smoothly, extending a hand. "Technical advisor." Julian shook it, his smile sharp. "Advisor, huh? Must be nice working with Terry. She's unforgettable." Dean's grip tightened just enough to make a point. "She is." Terry cleared her throat, cutting through the tension. "What are you doing here, Julian?" "Same as you," Julian said, his tone lazy but his eyes sharp. "Watching, listening, collecting secrets." Dean's jaw ticked. "You always this charming? Or is it just for us?" Julian grinned. "Depends on the company." Terry rolled her eyes. "Save the theatrics. I've got work to do." Julian leaned closer, his voice dropping to a purr. "You always do, Creed. But one of these days, you should let someone take care of you." Dean stiffened, and Terry felt heat rise in her chest. Not attraction, but irritation. Julian was a game she didn't have time to play. She turned on her heel, Dean following like a shadow. They found Lila near the stage, her smile brittle as Ethan chatted with a group of investors. Terry observed quietly, cataloging every glance, every gesture. Ethan looked relaxed, attentive. Nothing screamed betrayal. But Lila's eyes told a different story. Fear, doubt, the kind Terry knew too well. Dean leaned close, his voice low. "Julian's watching you." Terry didn't look. "Let him." Dean hesitated, then said, "You know he's flirting." Terry smirked. "Julian flirts with oxygen." Dean chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. For the first time, Terry wondered, really wondered, why Dean cared so much, and why the thought of Julian's grin made her stomach twist in ways she couldn't explain. Later, as they left the gala, Dean was quiet. Too quiet. Terry glanced at him in the car, the city lights painting his face in gold and shadow. "You okay?" she asked. Dean's hands tightened on the wheel. "Fine." "Dean," Terry said softly. "Talk to me." He looked at her then, his eyes dark and steady. "I just don't like guys who think they can waltz in and take what they want." Terry's breath caught. For a moment, the air between them felt electric, charged with something neither of them could name. She looked away, her pulse hammering. Evidence, she told herself. Stick to evidence. But tonight, evidence felt like the last thing she wanted. Chapter 8, The Big Reveal. The office was quiet except for the hum of Terry's laptop and the faint buzz of the city outside. It was late, past midnight, and the glow from the desk lamp cast long shadows across the room. Terry sat rigid in her chair, scrolling through Ethan Vale's financial records for the third time. Something didn't add up. Dean paced behind her, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. He looked like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. "You're chasing ghosts," he said finally. his voice low but edged with frustration. Terry didn't look up. There's a gap in his expenses. 2 weeks unaccounted for. Maybe he paid cash, Dean said. Maybe he bought a yacht. Maybe he's hiding something, Terry snapped, sharper than she intended. She exhaled, forcing calm. Clients don't hire me for maybes. Dean stopped pacing, his jaw tight. Clients hire you because you don't trust anyone. Terry froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Excuse me? Dean stepped closer, his eyes dark and steady. You think every man is Marcus. Every case is a repeat of what he did to you. You're so busy looking for betrayal, you can't see what's right in front of you. Terry's pulse hammered. What's that supposed to mean? Dean's voice dropped, raw and unguarded. It means I've been here for 6 years, Terry. 6 years of driving you around, fixing your tech, watching you tear yourself apart because some idiot couldn't see what he had. And all this time, He broke off, his hands curling into fists. I've been in love with you. The words hit like a gunshot, sharp, shocking, impossible to ignore. Terry stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. Dean, I didn't plan to say it, he said, his voice rough. Hell, I didn't want to, because I know you don't do feelings. You do facts, evidence, certainty, and I can't give you that. All I can give you is me. Silence stretched between them, thick and electric. Terry's mind scrambled for something, anything, to hold on to. She wanted to retreat behind logic, behind the walls she'd built brick by brick. But the look in Dean's eyes, steady, unwavering, made those walls feel paper-thin. Dean, she said again, softer this time. You shouldn't. Shouldn't what? He asked, his voice breaking just enough to make her chest ache. Feel this way? Say it out loud? Pretend I'm okay watching you shut everyone out. Including me? Terry swallowed hard, her throat dry. I don't know what to say. Dean gave a bitter laugh. You don't have to say anything. I needed you to know. He turned away, grabbing his jacket like he couldn't stand another second in the room. Terry watched him go, her heart pounding against the cage of her ribs. For the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't quantify, couldn't file away, couldn't control. And it terrified her. Chapter 9, the turning point, the case was over. Ethan Vale wasn't cheating, wasn't hiding a mistress, wasn't plotting an escape from his engagement. He was guilty only of being a man who wanted to surprise his fiancée with a wedding that looked like a magazine spread. Terry Creed had delivered the truth to Lila Hart that morning, and the woman had cried tears of relief into a silk handkerchief. Job done. Evidence secured. Another client saved from the claws of doubt. So why did Terry feel hollow? She sat at her desk, staring at the closed case file like it had betrayed her. Normally, this was the part she loved. The clean ending, the certainty, the satisfaction of being right. But tonight, the silence in the office felt heavier than usual. Dean's desk was empty, his chair pushed back like he'd left in a hurry. He had, hours ago, after his confession, Dean had stayed just long enough to finish the report. His voice clipped, his movements precise. No jokes, no easy banter, no warm smile that made the room feel less like a fortress. Then he'd grabbed his jacket and walked out without looking back. Terry told herself it was fine. Better, even. Distance was good. Distance meant control. But as the hours ticked by, she found herself replaying his words like evidence she couldn't file away. I've been in love with you. She hated how it made her chest ache. Hated how it cracked something inside her she'd spent years reinforcing. Love was a con. She knew that as well as she knew her own name. And yet, Dean wasn't Marcus. Dean wasn't a liar. Dean was steady, loyal, the kind of man who showed up and stayed. 6 years of proof. 6 years of quiet devotion she'd been too blind or too scared to see. Terry closed her laptop and stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. She couldn't sit here drowning in thoughts. She needed air. Movement. Something to drown out the echo of his voice. The city was alive with neon and noise, but Terry barely noticed as she walked, her boots striking the pavement in sharp rhythm. She ended up at a diner 2 blocks from her apartment, the kind of place where the coffee was bad and the pie was worse. She slid into a booth, ordered both, and stared at the Formica table like it held answers. Didn't, but her phone did, buzzing with a text from Dean. Reports uploaded. I'll handle the invoice tomorrow. Professional. Distant. Like nothing had happened. Terry stared at the message until the words blurred. She wanted to reply, wanted to say something. Anything that wasn't about invoices or reports. But what? Don't leave. I need you. I'm scared. None of those sounded like her. None of those sounded like the woman who built her life on certainty. She typed, thanks. Then deleted it. Typed again. You okay? Deleted that too. The waitress dropped the coffee with a clatter, and Terry jumped like she'd been caught doing something illicit. She muttered thanks, wrapped her hands around the mug, and tried to steady herself. Evidence was easy. Feelings were chaos. And Terry Creed didn't do chaos. Except tonight, chaos was all she had. Back at his apartment, Dean stared at his own phone, Terry's name glowing on the screen with no new messages. He told himself he was fine, that saying the words was enough, that he could live with whatever came next. But the truth was, He felt like someone had ripped the floor out from under him. He loved her. He'd loved her for years. And now she knew. Which meant everything had changed or nothing had. He didn't know which was worse. Dean tossed the phone onto the couch and scrubbed a hand over his face. He'd given her space because that's what Terry needed. But space felt like punishment when all he wanted was to hear her voice, see her smile, feel her laugh vibrate through the car on some late-night stakeout. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Tomorrow he'd go back to work. He'd be professional. He'd be steady. He'd be the man she could count on, even if she never counted him as anything more. But tonight, Dean let himself break. Just a little. Chapter 10 The Grand Gesture. Terry Creed had never been good at apologies. Words weren't her weapon of choice. Facts were. Evidence was. But tonight, as she stood outside Dean Howe's apartment building with her heart pounding like a runaway train, she realized evidence couldn't save her. Not this time. She'd spent the entire day trying to bury herself in work, combing through new client inquiries, updating case files, anything to drown out the echo of his voice. I've been in love with you. But the harder she worked, the louder it got. Until finally, she shut her laptop, grabbed her coat, and told herself the truth she'd been avoiding. She didn't want him to walk away. The elevator ride felt endless. Terry stared at her reflection in the mirrored walls. Hair pulled back, leather jacket zipped to her chin, eyes sharp but uncertain. She looked like a woman going into battle. Maybe she was. When the doors slid open, she stepped into the hallway, her boots clicking against polished tile. Dean's door was at the end, light spilling from the crack beneath it. He was home. Good. Because if he wasn't, she didn't know what she'd do with all the words clawing at her throat. She knocked. Once. Twice. The door opened. And there he was, Dean Howe, in a faded t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, looking like every defense she'd ever built was about to crumble. Terry, he said, his voice low, guarded. What are you? Don't, she cut in, her tone sharper than she meant. She took a breath, forcing herself to slow down. Don't say anything yet. I need to talk. Dean stepped back, letting her in without a word. The apartment was warm, lived in, books stacked on shelves, a guitar leaning against the wall, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. Terry stood in the center of the room, her hands clenched at her sides. You blindsided me, she said finally, her voice tight. Last night. You. God. Dean, you dropped a bomb and then walked out. Dean's jaw tightened. I didn't want to make it harder for you. Harder. Terry laughed, the sound brittle. You think this is hard because I don't care? Because I don't feel anything? Dean's eyes flickered. Hope and hurt tangled together. Do you? Terry swallowed, her throat dry. I don't know, she admitted, the words tasting like glass. I don't know because I've spent years convincing myself feelings are a liability. That love is just another lie waiting to happen. Dean stepped closer, his voice soft but steady. I'm not Marcus. I know, Terry whispered. You're everything he wasn't. Loyal. Honest. You've been here, Dean. Every damn day. And I... Her voice cracked, and she hated it, hated how raw she felt. I don't know how to do this. Dean reached out, his fingers brushing hers like a question. Then let me help. Terry looked up, meeting his gaze. There was no judgment there, no impatience. Just quiet certainty. The kind she'd spent her life chasing in evidence and suddenly found in him. I'm scared, she said, her voice breaking. Dean smiled, gentle and sure. So am I. For a moment, they stood there, the air thick with everything unsaid. Then Terry moved, closing the distance, her hands gripping his shirt like it was the only solid thing in the world. Dean's arms wrapped around her, strong and steady. And for the first time in years, Terry Creed let herself believe in something without proof. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't logic. It was messy and terrifying and real. And it felt like home. Chapter 11 Epilogue. 3 weeks later, Terry Creed's office looked the same. 2 desks, a wall of filing cabinets, and a corkboard cluttered with sticky notes. But everything felt different. Dean sat at his desk, typing away on his laptop, his sleeves rolled up, his usual calm radiating like sunlight. Terry watched him from across the room, pretending to review a case file, while her mind wandered to places it never used to go. Like how his smile still made her stomach flip, or how his coffee tasted better than hers because he always remembered exactly how she liked it. They weren't loud about it. No grand declarations, no social media posts, just quiet shifts, like the way Terry's jacket now hung next to Dean's on the coat rack, or how his toothbrush had found a permanent spot in her bathroom. They were still partners, still professionals, still the team that could crack a case faster than most agencies. But now there was something more. Something Terry had sworn she'd never let herself want again. And she was okay with that. Client meeting at noon, Dean said, glancing up from his screen. Guy thinks his business partner is skimming profits. Terry smirked. People lie. Evidence doesn't. Dean grinned. You're predictable. Efficient, Terry corrected, tossing him a file. Pull the financials. I'll handle the interview. Dean caught the folder easily, his eyes lingering on hers for a beat longer than necessary. You know, he said, his tone teasing. You're a lot easier to work with now that you're not trying to scare off every man within a 5-mile radius. Terry arched an eyebrow. You think I scared you? Dean leaned back in his chair, his smile slow and wicked. Terrified me. Terry laughed. A real laugh, the kind that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. You're still here. Always, Dean said simply, and the words settled between them like a promise. Later, as they headed out for the meeting, Dean opened the car door for her like he always did. Terry slid into the passenger seat, her camera bag at her feet, and glanced at him as he rounded the hood. For years, this had been routine, stakeouts, surveillance, long drives filled with banter and bad coffee. But now, every moment hummed with something new, something she couldn't measure or quantify, something that scared her and thrilled her all at once. Love wasn't evidence. It wasn't logical. It was messy and unpredictable and terrifying. And Terry Creed, private investigator, cynic, survivor, was finally okay with that. As Dean started the engine, Terry reached over, her fingers brushing his. He glanced at her, his smile soft and certain, and for the first time in years, Terry didn't need proof. She already had it.